Executive Director of the Hamtramck Historical Museum. I just want to welcome everybody to the museum here on our program today. We're doing a special program for Archaeology Day, and this is in response to what we're doing with Wayne State University and the archaeological dig that we've been doing in Hamtramck for the last several weeks. The students from Wayne State who are presenting here the things that they found here. And it's a really fascinating look into the history of Hamtramck. So take a look. We have some guest speakers here. Christopher from Wayne State University, who conducted the program, led the students, and continues to work at the museum as we recover Hamtramck's wonderful history. So please enjoy. Thank you. Very, very exciting, very, very fruitful. So I'm not going to stand here. I'm going to turn the program over to KIRCHNER, who is the director of this whole operations. So KIRCHNER.
Thank you, Greg. I just want to start by thanking Greg and everybody, the board and volunteers here at the Hamtramck Historical Museum for hosting us today and for partnering with us on what is the third season of excavations here in Hamtramck. Greg and I have been working together, Wayne State Hamtramck Historical Museum Partnership, since the fall of 2018. In 2018 and 2020, I taught a class, the class that I'm still teaching this semester, and students who are here today, called Archaeological Field Methods at Wayne State. And this class is designed to teach undergraduate and graduate students the basics of archaeological excavation, so the soup to nut process of how to identify a site, how to map it, how to scientifically recover data, and then how to interpret those artifacts and data in ways that tell stories of histories and people who have kind of been lost to the passage of time. So this year, the past two seasons, in 2018 and 2020, we were working in the area of Hamtramck's first City Hall and Village Hall, and we called that area Old Hamtramck Center. Anyone you see here who has a shirt like this that's gray with a bright blue logo, they worked on that project, so you can hit them up and ask them questions about that. They're the veterans. But this year we moved a block further south on Conco to an area, a vacant lot, what is now a vacant lot. It's part of the Hamtramck Recycling Center. And for a very long time, we don't know how long, from the late 19th century until the 1930s, on this little parcel of grass that you see on the right here, stood a saloon that was perhaps built, but it was owned and operated by a German immigrant family from at least the 1890s until 1916, when the proprietor, his name is Frank Gass, passed away. And in 1918, Prohibition was enacted in Michigan. And like every good Hamtramck saloon, this building turned into a soda shop. But within a couple of years, there's newspaper records about how it was, of course, busted for being a blind pig. So I'm going to give you a little bit more background about the site and show you some pictures of the excavations, and I can answer a few questions. We're going to do a short half-hour program now. I'll talk for a few more minutes about the excavation project, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Dan Treppel, who's going to talk about another project we've been doing in Hamtramck, and some of the students from that project. And I'm not sure if Sam's here to talk about some of the work at the museum here, but we'll we'll see what happens when we get to that point. Okay, so here we are. If you'd like to visit this site, and the reason why we're not out there today is because it's in a very high traffic area. If you head down Campo, you'll eventually arrive at the railroad crossing, the viaduct that goes over the road. This site is right up against that on the south side, so it's not necessarily the most scenic of locations. Here it is from the air, and the red triangle outlines the area where we are focusing our excavations right now. There are actually two different sites within that tiny little triangle. There's the footprint and the back of the saloon, and we've got 4 different excavation units that are focused on recovering information about the saloon, everything from the building's architecture to its trash piles. So different groups are focusing on recovering different types of data. Some of it might be structural, some of it might be portable objects. And in this unit, you can't quite see here, but Aaliyah, she's over there, and Brittany back there, they actually found some wooden floorboards from the ground level of the saloon. So we are very confident that there are still some architectural remains of the building there. And in back of the saloon lot, there was a residential lot. There was a home that stood there in the 19th century, and then at the turn of the 20th century, some shops, and that's where it's called the Denton site, because that's the side street there on the corner. So we have 2 groups excavating there. So when you walk around after this program, we're just going to kind of casually keep the stations open here. You can ask the students. Everyone who's wearing a green shirt today is one of the excavators currently participating in the project. So ask them which site they're working at, ask them what some of their most exciting finds are. So when we identified this site, we weren't quite so sure, we didn't know much of anything about its history. So the very first thing we did was go back to some of the historic maps that exist for Hamtramck. These were fire insurance atlases that were created to basically inform municipalities about what sort of firefighting resources they might need to gather. So buildings that are built out of brick are color-coded in pink, buildings that are built out of wood are color-coded in yellow. And our site, this is a map from 1915, is right here. You can see the saloon is the triangular-shaped building. There were 2 little shops around the corner where the Denton folks are digging. And there's a 2-story porch in back of the saloon, and that's the area where the trash dump that I'll talk about is located. The saloon itself was 2 stories. On the bottom was the saloon itself, and on the second floor there was a boarding house and apartments where some of the family members who worked in the saloon lived, and some of the other workers lived as well. It's not actually the end of the slideshow. Hold on. What's going on? This is not our saloon, but if we were standing in front of our saloon and facing south, the direction I'm standing in right now, if we were standing right in the street in front of our saloon, this is the scene that we would have been looking at in 1909. So this is what Campo looked like at the time. And just 2 years later, the Dodge brothers opened their plant a couple blocks to the south and radically transformed this area. If you go south of the viaduct right now, it looks nothing at all like this. And this is a very famous saloon. You'll find lots of information about it if you poke back in the historical records, old newspaper articles. It's called the C.J. Faber Saloon, and it stood there on the corner for many decades, and Faber was a prominent citizen in the village and then city council. Later, a lot of charity and political events took place there. So we know a lot about the ways in which some of the saloons in Hamtramck featured very prominently in the political and social life and operations of the village and then the city. We didn't know the name of our saloon. It wasn't as well covered in the media events that were held there as the Faber Saloon or the saloon that was across the street. This is a record from the newspaper of the liquor license payments that proprietors were required to pay every year to maintain their liquor license. This is from 1911. It has the name of the saloon, and the address is right next to it. And when we found this record, we realized, in comparison with the maps, that at that intersection, there was a saloon on every corner. The people that were going to work at the Russell Wheel Foundry, the Briggs Manufacturing Company, they had options about where they were going to stop on the way from work and probably the way to work as well in some cases. And so we had Faber Saloon on one corner, the Munchinger Saloon on another corner, Kraft House was on another corner, and here in the red arrow we have the Frank Gas Saloon. We don't see much about the gas saloon in the newspapers, and we've started to wonder why, and upon further investigation, it turns out that this was a saloon that Frank Gass's mother-in-law owned. So it was a woman-owned and operated saloon, so we wonder maybe what was the story of her kind of political and entrepreneurial history. So we hope archaeology will help address that. Frank Gass operated the saloon and his family from the turn of the century to 1916. He was advertising in Detroit's German language newspaper, so that's actual advertisement from 1916. The viaduct was created over Campo and opened in 1927. This is a picture that Greg found of a parade they had to initiate its opening, and you can just see the corner of our saloon in the image. So we know they didn't tear it down when they built the viaduct. So we're piecing together all the clues about when it was built, when it came down, how it was used over time, who owned and operated it. Frank Gass died in 1918, same year Prohibition started, and a series of other owners took over and, like I said, opened it as a soda shop, and here's the newspaper article that describes the raid that took place there in 1923. And some of the students have been combing through in their midnight hours of some of the aerial photographs of Hamtramck from the 20s and 30s. And so far as we've located to this point, the building seems to have disappeared from the landscape by 1934. Is that right? That's the John found the aerial photograph from 1934, and there's no building standing there anymore. And there was never a building built on that triangle parcel again. So we know that the saloon building itself stood sometime from the 1880s or 1890s until the early 1930s. So Prohibition ended in 1933. We saw the building was there in 1927. So we have we've narrowed it down to like a 6-year period when we know it was torn down. And here's pictures of it. This is some of the absolute bonus of working with the Historical Museum is that they have a tremendous archive of photographs and other records. This photo is from 1922, so before the viaduct was constructed. So this would be, if you were standing just north of the building, this would be where the viaduct is now, obscuring the building. But here's the saloon on the bottom and the living quarters on the top. And this is looking from the other direction, from the south to north, and so the train tracks would have been on the edge here. And this is the front of the saloon 10 years earlier in 1910. And so finally, this is unbelievable. The landscape at the saloon site has been totally transformed and modified, except for that little triangular parcel. The Briggs Manufacturing Company cleared the residential buildings along Denton Street over time, beginning in the early 1910s, and had a giant manufacturing facility standing there. I think the ruins of it burnt down, was it 1986 or thereabouts, and a very massive historical fire in Hamtramck. Maybe some of you remember that. But by some miracle, this giant trash dump from the saloon and survived the test of time, right tucked away between the viaduct and where the end of the Briggs building would have been and where the end of the saloon building would have been. So in what is basically a 6 by 6 foot area, a couple of the students have been digging through this trash dump, and it's not just a trash dump from the whole neighborhood. We've been able to tell from the artifacts that this trash dump is related to the saloon, but especially the saloon at the turn of the century. So have a look later at some of these special finds to come out of the saloon. And our favorite is this token, and it's really corroded, so it's hard to read here. We'll capture some better pictures of it. It says F Gas Saloon Hamtramck. There's nothing better than getting a token that has the exact name of the building on it, except for maybe having a date on the other side. But it said it was good for 5 in trade. So it seems like the saloon, which, and this was a common practice at the time, would issue its customers credit through tokens so that, when payday came, they could pay up and cash in their tokens for food and drink and other things in the meantime. We've also got a pocket watch, lots of porcelain doll parts, tons and tons of bottles from local Hamtramck and Detroit manufacturers. That's a cool Stroh's bottle topper made of porcelain before, it has a date on it, 1898 I think, so before the screw top was invented. So we are getting a really unparalleled insight into turn of the century Hamtramck through these artifacts, both the space of entertainment and restaurant, but also the living conditions and kind of material world of the immigrant population at that time. So we're really excited to, we're going to be washing and analyzing these artifacts for a very long time to come, because the trash dump especially has produced tens of thousands. We're really excited to see what stories we can tell from them. So I will, that's just going back to, I'll leave it on that map, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now, or I'll be floating around here afterwards. We have a table over here that talks about the history of the site, and the students who are at that table would be happy to share more details with you. We have a table over here displaying some of the special finds at the site, so you can have a look, touch them, and then we have a group back here that are washing the dirt off of just recently excavated artifacts past week, so you can see how we process some of our finds. Our last day of digging will be this coming Monday, and from that point onwards we'll be in the lab. But we will be sure to do an exhibit here once we've cleaned everything up. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Dan Treppel, who is visiting us today from Michigan Tech. And Dan and I and Greg are part of a very large project team that it's called the Hamtramck Spatial Archaeology Project, Historic Spatial Archaeology Project. And we are in the midst of working together to create what will be an interactive kind of digital deep map and atlas that links together all sorts of historical and archaeological information. So you're going to hear from Dan, then you can hear very briefly from 2 of the students who are working on the project with us, and then we'll be good. So here you go, Dan, take it away.
Thank you very much, Krista. Thanks everyone for coming today. I'm really excited to be chatting with everyone, and this is really just a teaser. So I'm happy to speak with you afterwards. I'll be kind of near the front of the museum here, and I can show you some of what I'm about to talk about. So, but for the moment, what this is a project that's funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it's a partnership between Wayne State University's archaeology program and myself and some colleagues at Michigan Technological University. So I'm an archaeologist and a geospatial researcher at Michigan Tech. I actually often call myself an industrial archaeologist because that's the program at Michigan Tech. It's the only one in the country. So this is about the archaeology and the heritage of the industrializing world, essentially. And this is a wonderful place to do that kind of work. And as Krista sort of outlined, there's this great partnership that already exists between the museum here and their amazing collection of artifacts about Hamtramck's history, as well as the awesome archaeology that's coming out of here that Krista and company have been doing. Where I come in is trying to think of ways to combine the different kinds of evidence that is being collected about Hamtramck and help tell the stories about this place in a way that's maybe getting more out of the evidence and making it a little more accessible as well. So what we're calling here the Hamtramck Historic Spatial Archaeology Project, a bit of a mouthful, no acronym, it is what it is. Does what it says on the box, hopefully. Is all about taking that information that's being gathered from both the physical remains out of the ground and also this great collection that we're surrounded with right now, and bringing that into a digital space that's also spatialized, it's mapped. So think of sort of like a Google Maps through time and space about Hamtramck that is interactive, that you can access. That's sort of the goal of the project in a nutshell. And so what does that mean? Again, it's kind of hard to explain in a static sense, which is why I encourage you to talk to me later. But essentially what this project is doing, and it's going to wrap up in the summer of 2023 here, is to produce a public web accessible app that you can log onto on the internet from anywhere in the world, and you can look at archaeological data and historic Hamtramck collection data that are contextualized on an interactive dynamic map. So that we have, in this case, this is a screenshot of our just released, or rather in development, alpha prototype here. We've got these little red rectangles that represent the excavation units from the old Hamtramck Center that Krista and her team have been working on between 2018 and 2020, overlaid on a 1915 Sanborn fire insurance map, similar to the kind that Krista was showing you about the saloon site. And the idea here is to show these historic sources in their spatial context, so they're mapped just like a Google Maps aerial photograph or street map would be in their actual coordinates. And then the units, the excavations are overlaid on that, but these are interactive and digital. So when you click on something, it will tell you information about the actual dig itself. You can click, I apologize for the blurriness here, but it's hard to kind of show this much information in one space, but you can click here and get a little sidebar with all the artifacts that were recovered from that particular excavation unit that are in Wayne State's archaeology collection. You can also click on the buildings and get information about them. As a couple of our grad students working on the project will probably mention, they're also working on bringing the whole catalog into here so you can look at that, of the artifacts that were recovered, as well as photos and 3D models that we're building of some of the most interesting artifacts. And so you'll be able to click on those and see them in multiple dimensions. So the idea is you can come here and look at these things in person as we are today, but anybody, even people who can't get out as easily or are far away, can still look at these things from multiple different perspectives. And we can put, thousands of pieces of information in this one interactive space. And you can move through time. We've got a pull down up there to different maps from different time periods. So you can see change over time how the landscape evolved as Hamtramck industrialized. And we also have a little transparency slider so you can look at the modern aerial underneath and compare the buildings at a particular time frame with the built environment today. And so this is sort of bringing archaeology into this digital space and sharing it publicly, which is something that we're calling deep mapping. So this is sort of a researcher's term for trying to build a digital map that is kind of bigger than the sum of its parts and gives you a different way into looking at this information. And of course, it's not just about archaeology. A really key part of it is this institution right here. And the wonderful collection that we have, the people we have behind it who run it and make it what it is, and the partnership between Wayne State and the museum itself. So how do we use the evidence to sort of show the value of that partnership and share it more widely? And so this deep map also is going to incorporate collections from the museum, which are going to drive our mapping program. Where are the things in here that we find most interesting or people are most excited to learn more about? We can map the places they're associated with in our software and then put these museum artifacts in there so that you can look at something within its time and space context. So if we have a photo of Hamtramck High School graduates from 1927 here, we can actually map that artifact's representation in our digital software to the place that it belongs to. So it's here, and you can look at it here and talk about it here, but the software also shows you where else it ought to be in space and time, where else and when else, really. And so it's about showcasing the archaeology in a digital space. It's about showcasing the Hamtramck Historic Museum in a digital space. But most importantly, it's about cross-linking those two types of evidence together and showing how these stories can actually be something a little more interesting than just looking at one thing. We're also trying to add some features later on. I mean, again, this is we're kind of in our alpha prototype stage, but we'd like to add things like the ability to show off some oral histories in here, or possibly even interactive story sharing, so you can contribute your own story. And the software will ask you where and when this story took place, and you can actually map your own story. And this will all be publicly available and live on the web at the conclusion of the project. So look out for a beta app release in the summer of 2023. And then hopefully this is really a beginning rather than an end, or rather the end of the beginning perhaps. And we would like to build this into something even more robust in the future. But again, this is supposed to be more of a teaser than a detailed sort of look-see. So please come and chat with me afterwards. I'd be happy to talk more about it. But yeah, thanks again, and I look forward to chatting with you further. All right.
So we're going to hear very briefly from two of the graduate students who have been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work on this project, Julia Delora and Virginia Nastase, and they're going to make an appeal to you. So please go see Dan. He is looking for your input today, especially on what, if you are from this area, what are the buildings and sites that are historically important here in Hamtramck or are important to you personally, because we're looking to add sites beyond the archaeology site to the list, that, in addition to like the high school. So he'll be collecting that information. He'll show you how the prototype's working out. It's really cool. And Virginia and Julia have an appeal that they would like to make too.
Hi, just a quick announcement. So, like Dan mentioned earlier, we're looking about to try to include some oral histories later on. So we have a table tucked in the back over there. If anyone wants to come talk, we'll be recording. We also have paper forms. If you don't want to write right now and you don't want to talk, we have paper forms that you can fill out, and we also have digital copies that you can fill out online. So if someone isn't here that you know would be a great person to talk to about sites in the area or about their story in Hamtramck, then come talk to us, let us know. We can give you either some paper forms or a digital copy, or we can record you if you want to talk as well.
Thank you. And you don't have to be descended from like the high and mighty of Hamtramck to share your story. Like if you just want to say, I grew, you can give 2 minutes. I grew up at this address and I went to high school there. My name is such and such. It can be that basic, or you can elaborate more to the extent that you're comfortable doing. We'd also love any stories you have. If you look at the artifacts and something jogs your memory about them, those stories are interesting too. If you can help us identify them, or if you might say, oh, I had a shoe just like that. We like those stories that connect with the objects too, because eventually you'll be able to pull up a building on our archaeology site and see the objects and hear somebody talk about them, and click on a building and see all of the people that lived there at one point in time, and go in all sorts of directions. So we hope it will be a useful preservation tool, but also a useful research tool. And this is the first time Dan has been involved with one of these up at Michigan Tech called the Keweenaw Time Traveler, which I encourage you to look at. It's amazing, and it's in a much more advanced stage right now. But this is the first time anyone's ever attempted to incorporate archaeological artifacts into one of these. So we got a lot of kinks to work out, and that's why we need your feedback and your input on how we're doing. Okay, so our last speaker in our short program is going to be Sam Burns, and he will introduce himself a bit more, but he too is an archaeologist. We hope to have a whole a group of them here in Hamtramck, and a new dad, congratulations. And he is going to speak to us a little bit about what's going on here in the museum with respect to its collection. So here you go, Sam.
Thank you, Krista. Hi, as Krista said, my name is Sam Burns. I know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm a local Hamtramck resident and a member of the board of the Friends of Historic Hamtramck. And currently I work in cultural resource management, archaeology. And I just wanted to talk a little bit today about how archaeological thinking is informing what we're doing here at the museum. And as Krista said, I am a new dad. I have a 2-week-old baby at home, so I don't have a nice PowerPoint, and I'm going to be winging it a little bit. So if I get a little disjointed here, please bear with me. So when Dan was talking about this mapping infrastructure that we're working on building, what we're really doing is what we're really talking about is context, right? We're talking about the context, putting all of these disparate pieces of evidence together and drawing the connections between them, the connections between people, places, and things. And context is really one of the main themes of archaeology. It's something that you get taught from the very first intro class all the way up to graduate school and beyond. And I'm not going to get into archaeological theory here, I promise, but when we talk about context in archaeology, we often talk about two different kinds. We talk about the systemic context, which is the context of an artifact within its use life. Who made it? How is it made? What is it made from? How is it used? What does it mean? And then we also talk about its archaeological context, which is where was it found? What was it found with? What is its condition? What has happened to it in that period between when it was used and when we found it? And we think about both of those kinds of things here, especially in connection to our cataloging project. So we have a very large collection of artifacts upstairs. What you see here is just a very small part of our collection. And most of our artifacts are not really cataloged. They're just in boxes. We don't really know even what all of them are. So we're at the beginning stage of a major project of cataloging everything we have. And we use a software called PastPerfect. And when I came on board the museum, setting this up was my first kind of task. And that software has a built-in layer for recording information about people and connecting them to objects. And then we also worked with the PastPerfect data folks and built a new layer that is places. And we were able to get a list of all of the residential addresses in Hamtramck and load that into that database. So now as we're cataloging artifacts in our collection, we can look at them, look at that information. You know, if we have a photograph of a house and we can see the house number, we can put that right into the catalog. So we're drawing that connection of that context, that original systemic context of that artifact. Where was it? Where was it used? How was it used? Who used it? And so as we're doing our cataloging project, that's a really big emphasis that we have, is to draw these connections. And you know, hopefully that will then be able to help our catalogs feed into this infrastructure that Dan is building. And really, as Dan's talking about a deep map, we're trying to build what I would call a deep catalog. It goes beyond just, you know, what is this artifact, but actually tells us a little bit more about who used it and where it was used and how it was used, and all of that. Then to get to the archaeological context. Krista and her students are down the street digging up an archaeological site. I like to think that we have another archaeological site here in the building. There's a lot of similarities between opening up a unit in the ground and finding the artifacts in there and trying to figure out what they are and what's, you know, what we're seeing, and opening up a box of random artifacts upstairs. And as any of the students will tell you, one of the big time-consuming tasks of excavation is this little process of filling out artifact tags and looking at an artifact and saying, what is it? Is it a bottle? Is it a piece of metal? How do we sort it? What are the typologies we're going to use to kind of put some sort of structure into this chaos? And that is exactly what we're doing in our cataloging project here. A lot of it is very time-consuming work. Sometimes it gets very boring, but you get to think about things really the same way that we think about them in the field doing archaeology. So I wanted to end by inviting all of you to take part in this. If, as we're moving into winter, it's going to be a little harder to get out in the field and dig things up out of the ground. But we have plenty of work to do here. And we would love to have any of you who are interested come in and help us out with this. And hopefully help us build our deep catalog and put some of the context back to these artifacts and make it so that we can tell more stories than just, we can tell real stories about people and places and things and what these things meant and what they mean to us now, and go beyond just having a bunch of cool artifacts to come look at. And so I am going to have to take off right after I'm done speaking, but Greg is going to be here, and if you are interested at all, please come talk to Greg or send us an email, and I really look forward to seeing more of you here.
I'm not leaving before I see a picture of the baby. So before we wrap up, I noticed that there are a few representatives here from the Detroit chapter of the Michigan Archaeological Society. Would either of you like to give our guests a quick introduction to DMAS and invitation to participate?
I may come up there, should I just?
Yeah, no, come up here.
Oh.
Come on up, because you're on TV.
Cool.
Advertise your rich. Here you go.
Dan is actually an alumni of DMAS at this point. So we have John over there. John is our secretary. My name is Dan Holcomb. I'm the president of the Detroit chapter of the Michigan Archaeological Society, which is a really great nonprofit organization which helps folks who are passionate about archaeology, whether you're an archaeologist yourself or someone who just is curious and wants to interact with archaeologists, archaeological sites, places, just like everything we've talked about today. If you would like to connect more on that level, you can actually have an email, sign up the list, get an email maybe once a month, get updates about archaeology in Southeast Michigan, Detroit, Hamtramck, and we get together, do programs, kind of stuff like this. Chit chat, see some cool artifacts, get to know one another, stay connected, do work possibly, job opportunities, come to sites and everything like that. So if you'd like to stay in touch, I regularly communicate about stuff like this here at the museum via Facebook and email. So if you'd like to learn more and stay connected, please have a chat with me, John. Dan can tell you about all the cool stuff we've done in the past as well.
Yeah, we will put thank you, Hannon. We will put a sign-up sheet at the table right over here. So if you would like to get emails from DMAS, or you can also follow the Detroit chapter of the Michigan Archaeology Society on Facebook. They're pretty active there. Okay, I would like to close by introducing my son, Casimir Rzuski. You want to say hi? Thank you for that loud spot. All right, so we are going to end the formal program here. Please take the time to look around and appreciate the exhibits and talk with the archaeologists. They are here to share their findings with you. And please also consider supporting the Hamtramck Historical Museum today in any way that you can as a volunteer by leaving a little bit behind, shopping in their gift shop, or just thanking Greg and the others on the way out. So thank you all for coming again, and thank you everybody who shared your speaking with us today.
Pick me up, you're back here.
All right.